أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الغرر الميامين، سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين، سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة الحجة بن الحسن العسكري، فداه أرواح العالمين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. وثبت لي قدم صدق عندك مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين الذين بذلوا مهجهم دون الحسين عليه السلام. We've been talking about the ways with which we can ensure that when we part with this world, we do so having achieved God's pleasure and acceptance. Because you can live your life with all kinds of ups and downs. One can go from bad to good, back to bad, back to good. But at the end of the day, when the dust settles, it doesn't matter what you did during the race. It doesn't matter how fast you started running when the sprint started. What matters is what happens at the finish line. Whether you reach the finish line of this world with faith in your heart and with submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The holy prophets of God, the apostles of the creator of the universe, the messengers who were entrusted to deliver God's words and teachings and instructions and commandments to the people, even they had this intense, persistent anxiety that just wouldn't go away. The anxiety that, God forbid, they may slip up and not make it to the finish line, or not make it with faith in their hearts. توفني مسلما وألحقني بالصالحين. Prophet Yunus, Prophet Yusuf, Prophet Yaqub, and so on and so forth, they would all pray to Allah, make us die as Muslims. And as we said, Islam at its very core is about submission. And that's what they mean. Allow me to leave this world in a state of surrender to you, O Allah. Surrender. Complete, unquestioning submission to the will, to the instructions, to the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, if God's religion during the time of Prophet Ibrahim stipulated that he must kill his own son, then that is what has to be executed. If God's religion specifies that at a certain point in time we must engage in armed struggle, that's what we do. But if God's religion teaches us that during a specific period and phase you are not to engage in any armed struggle, then that's exactly what we do. We don't rationalize. We don't impose our own views on God's religion. We don't say, this is what makes sense to me right now. When the commander of the faithful was ambushed in his home, when his house was the target of a vicious, merciless, vile attack by the most despicable hypocrites humanity has ever seen, creatures who are told that this house contains the likes of Fatima. Inna fil bayt Fatima. And his response is, wa'in? So what? Who cares? Whether it's Fatima, or her husband Ali, or her father Rasulullah. I am here to burn down the house. And I couldn't care less what anyone does or says. He wants to return Islam back to the pagan era. He wants to take those idols that he's been hiding in his basement out in the open. He wants those barrels of alcohol that he hasn't been able to drink as a companion of the Holy Prophet. He wants to bring them all out. He wants to destroy the legacy of the Holy Messenger of God. And yet, at that very moment, permission to fight was not granted. And what that means is that if someone decided to be hot-headed and chose to engage in armed struggle against the hypocrites, against the aggressors, against the oppressors, if they are to follow the teachings and leadership and authority of the one endowed with divine authority at that time, the commander of the faithful, then they had no choice but to refrain. Which is why traditions tell us that Al-Miqdad ibn al-Aswad al-Kindi Ridwanullah ta'ala alayh, this great companion of the Holy Prophet and later companion and supporter and disciple of Ali ibn Abi Talib, he stood there, his hand on the handle of the sword, grasping it as hard as he could, and his eyes stitched to the eyes of Ali ibn Abi Talib, waiting for the imam to give his instructions. If the imam says, launch, he'd launch. If the imam chose not to issue the order, he refrains from unsheathing his sword, even while watching and witnessing Amirul Mu'mineen be dragged from his house to the mosque in order to be coerced into giving what they call a bay'ah. Submission and surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what it's all about. And yet you have people who try to manipulate God's religion because they're trying to rationalize everything, because they feel unable to surrender to the will of God. They try to bend over backwards, twist everything that comes along their way. So they'll misinterpret the Quran, they will misinterpret the traditions of the Holy Prophet. In fact, prior to taking that step of misinterpreting the hadith, they try to discredit the hadith. One of the easiest things, especially because many of their audiences are incredibly gullible and ignorant, one of the easiest things nowadays, most audacious of acts, and yet the easiest, is to discredit the hadith. Oh, who says this hadith is authentic? Who says it's authentic? Are you a scholar of hadith? Are you an expert in authenticating the chain of transmission of the words of the Holy Prophet and his household? Do you know the ABCs of ilm al-rijal? Do you know anything about dirayatul hadith? Have you read, have you studied, who are you? All of a sudden you're an expert? This, brothers and sisters, is like someone expressing their own views and personal opinions about medical matters. Cystic fibrosis? Oh, that's easy. All you got to do is mix this with that, this herb with that plant, and you'll be good. COVID-19, not a problem. Everybody seems to have a recipe, a prescription, a remedy, some kind of a medicine to cure the world of a global pandemic that's hijacked the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. All of a sudden, everyone becomes a medical expert, right? The difference is, when you pretend to be a medical expert, when you pretend to be a doctor or a physician, it's very easy to discredit you. Because the first question people will ask is, I'm sorry, are you a doctor? Did we miss the time when you went to medical school and studied there for 12 years? Because as far as I know, you're not a doctor. That's it. Simple as that. But when it comes to matters of religion, and particularly when it comes to hadith, no one challenges them. And so they'll come up with fancy expressions to try and create some kind of a framework to deceive the masses into thinking that what these people are doing is an actual, legitimate, bona fide, intellectual pursuit. So they'll call it something like Quran centricity, which is basically a fancy rephrasing of what Umar ibn al-Khattab said to the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when the messenger was on his deathbed and asked for a pen and paper to write his final will and testament, after which he would guarantee that people would not deviate. And he turned around and with the utmost audacity and shamelessness said, إِنَّ الرَّجُلَ لَيَهْجُرْ حَسْبُنَا كِتَابُ اللَّهِ. These, by the way, I'm combining two different hadiths. One hadith says, a man declared, إِنَّ الرَّجُلَ لَيَهْجُرْ. The guy is delirious. Look at the shamelessness. Look at the audacity. If there was no other proof, astaghfirullah. The other hadith actually mentions his name and says, قال عمر لقد غلب عليه الوجع. He's too overwhelmed by pain. حسبنا كتاب الله. We don't need the book of Allah. Do not, whatever you do, don't give him the pen and paper because I know what he's about to write down. Quran centricity, brothers and sisters, is another fancy repackaging of the same philosophy. So there's no need to treat us like fools into thinking that you've come up with anything original or interesting. You've basically borrowed the concept from Umar ibn al-Khattab. At least be honest. At least don't plagiarize. At least provide a reference to your theory. Quran centricity. Why? The idea is to discredit all hadith. Because the problem they have with hadith is that it's too elaborate. There are too many hadiths. You can't really misinterpret hadith as easily as you can with the Quran. The Quran is mujmal. The Quran contains a lot of verses that are mutashabih. They are allegorical. They can take multiple meanings. You can take one verse, give it to two scholars, and end up with three different opinions about the meaning of the verse. You can't do that. That's been done. It's been done for over 1,000 years. Do you think every deviant school of thought hasn't provided Quranic references to justify and back up and substantiate their claims? Have you not watched a sermon by the one who's now a rotten corpse, alhamdulillah? But have you not watched a sermon by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the former mastermind and leader of ISIS? Have you not seen how many verses of the Quran he quotes? What does that tell you? It tells you that as far as the Quran is concerned, unless you provide some kind of a frame of reference for the Quran, unless you couple the Quran, you complete the equation and couple the Quran with the interpreters of the Quran, then you can basically do whatever you want with that text. قُلْ هُوَ آيَاتٌ بَيِّنَاتٌ. Listen to this incredible verse. فِي صُدُورِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you know, the verses of the Quran are incredibly plain and clear. There's no ambiguity. The signs are as clear as the sun in the middle of the day. The issue, though, is that these signs are found in the chests of those who are believers. Meaning that the Quran isn't just this book. Of course, this book is the actual text of the Quran. But in order to achieve clarity on the meaning and interpretation of the Holy Quran, you have to refer to actual individuals. في صدور الذين آمنوا. It is kept in the chests, the bosoms of the believers. Who are the believers? Who's the believer? The one who never prostrated before an idol, or the one who was bending up and down all his life until he decided to join the prophetic mission because he realized that is a winning strategy. This religion is going to get somewhere. It's going somewhere. Who? Is it Ali ibn Abi Talib or is it anybody else? So, this whole thing about Quran centricity, if you ever hear that from someone, tell them, I'm sorry, the Quran itself instructs us to go back to the Holy Prophet and to the group of people that he identifies as الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا صُدُورِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ الصَّادِقِينَ. The Quran has provided us with very specific attributes to the people we need to refer back to. لِتُبَيَّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. O Messenger, your job is to elucidate and elaborate and interpret what has been revealed to the people. In other words, they can't just pick it up and understand it and apply it and turn it into Quran centricity. No. It's the Quran and the Hadith. إِنِّي تَارِكٌ فِيكُمُ الثَّقَلَيْنِ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ. Say it with me. وَعِتْرَتِي أَهْلَ بَيْتِي. The Quran and my family. The Quran and my successors. The Quran and my heirs. So, we must submit. Now, if someone comes along and says, Salat al-Fajr is 2 raka'at, 2 cycles. But why can't it be 3? I'm just going to volunteer. The obligatory part is 2. I'm just going to add 1 more. The more, the merrier. Is that acceptable? Why isn't it acceptable? Why? Have you ever thought about that? Why can't I just make up a new prayer? There is the morning prayer, there is the noon prayer. How about a brunch prayer? How about some prayer in the holy month of Ramadan that is performed in a congregational manner called Salat al-Tarawih? Why not? Why not? If the intent is to worship God, if the idea is to exhibit devotion and supplication and prayer, then why can't we turn Salat al-Subh from 2 rak'at into 3? Why is it that the circumambulation around the Kaaba is 7 rounds? Why can't I make it 7.5 rounds, just to be sure? You can't even do that. But why? Why is it that when we go to Mina, those of you who have been to Hajj or Umrah will know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't, these are parts of the rituals of the pilgrimage to the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I go, so Hajj starts with Arafat. First you do Umrah, then the actual Hajj starts with going to Arafat, then going to Muzdalifah, then going to Mina. So on the day of Eid, on the 10th of the Hijjah, you get to Mina. The first thing you do in Mina is that you have to have collected these pebbles. And you collect 7 pebbles, not 8, not 6, not 17, 7. These pebbles, you take them, there are 3 giant rocks called al-jamarat. Nowadays there are giant rocks. Back in the days of the Prophet, it was just a pit, right? But as a marker, it looks like giant rocks. Or in fact, recently they've turned them into these walls. Regardless, so when you get to Mina on the day of Eid, what you do is you go to Jamarat al-Aqabah, which is the largest of the 3 rocks. And you leave the other 2. You have to throw the pebbles in the direction of the large rock on the day of Eid. Then after you do that, you slaughter the sacrificial lamb. Then you shave your head if you're a man. If you're a woman, obviously you don't shave your head, but you clip your nail, for example, or you cut a little bit of your hair. Then the next day, that same night, you have to spend it in Mina. Can't I go back to the hotel? No, you can't. Can't I go outside the perimeter of Mina? No, you can't. So you spend the night there. Then you have to come back the next day, and this time, instead of throwing the pebbles in the direction of Jamarat al-Aqabah, the biggest of the 3 rocks, you now have to hit all 3 rocks. Well, why can't I do this on the day of Eid, the day before that? No, you can't. Why? Why? Because God wants obedience. God isn't interested in my views or opinions. I think at some point we need to come to terms with this. My views, my opinions, my rationalizations, my theories about what is good and what isn't are worthless. Allah wants us to obey Him, to surrender to Him. Think about it. What was the problem with shaitan? I mean, seriously. Someone might say that shaitan worshipped Allah for 4,000 years. He's chosen to disobey one command. What's the big deal? Let it go, man. Just let it go. No. فَاخْرُجْ مِنْهَا إِنَّكَ رَجِيمٌ وَأَنَّ عَلَيْكَ لَعْنَتِي إِلَى يَوْمِ الدِّينِ. One disobedience. One. God drew the line here. This is important. This matters. You bow down before this pile of clay, or you are forever cursed and cast out of my kingdom and out of my mercy until the day of judgment. There's no ifs or buts. God isn't mucking around here. Allah wants obedience. He doesn't want your acts of worship. Honestly, my acts of worship, how are they going to add anything to God's kingdom or authority? If there is any benefit in my acts of worship, they are for me. What He really wants is to see whether you surrender when it hurts. When it actually hurts your ego. When it hurts your interests. When you don't quite feel comfortable. That's the exact moment Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see you and I submit to Him. A woman by the name of Khalid comes to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. The one who narrates the hadith is a companion of the Imam by the name of Abu Basir. He says that this woman came, she sat down, she said to the Imam, Ya ibn Rasulullah, I have a medical condition in my stomach. And in order to treat this medical condition, I've been advised by medical professionals, no less, by experts, that I need to mix dough with beer, alcohol. Alcohol has benefits. I'll be the first to admit it. In fact, the Quran says so. وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ. O Messenger of God, they ask you about alcohol and games of chance, articles of gambling, right? Cards, chess, all kinds of articles of gambling. They ask you about these things. Are they okay? Are they acceptable? قُلْ, tell them, فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ. There is a grave sin in these two things. وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. And yeah, also, by the way, there are benefits in them. وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. However, the gravity of this sin is greater than any perceived benefits or potential benefits that may originate from them. So this woman, Khalid, says to Imam al-Sadiq that doctors have prescribed beer mixed with dough for me to eat so that this would help me be relieved of my abdominal pain or stomach issues or gas issues or whatever it was that she had. The Imam said to her, Ya Khalid, that's what you were advised by the doctors, so what did you do? She said to him, I told my family, who are pushing me to take this medicine, I told them, by God, I will not taste this. It's haram, I know it's haram. It's beer. I will not, this mixture will not touch my lips until I go to Imam al-Sadiq and ask him about it. This, brothers and sisters, by the way, parenthetically speaking, this in itself is an incredible trait to have. When you're unsure about something, just don't do it. Stop. Try and seek clarification. Try and consult the experts. Ask the ulama. Ask the maraja. Nowadays it's so much easier. Just send out an email. Ask your trusted local scholar. She said, I will not do this. I shall refrain until I ask the Imam. So that's why I'm here asking you. The Imam said to her, but why? You knew the doctors are telling you this is good for you and this is hurting you, this condition of yours. Why didn't you eat the mixture, which is najis, essentially because of the beer? She said to him, because on the day of judgment, listen to this woman's incredible faith and insight. She said, Ya ibn Rasulullah, I refused and I refrained because on the day of judgment, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to me, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Why did you refrain from this? Why did you live your life the way you did? I will tell him that I consulted none other than Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. That I always consulted my Imam. I didn't do anything out of my own accord. Whatever my Imam says, وَإِنِّي, listen to this, قَلَّدْتُكَ دِينِي, I put my religion around your neck. In other words, whatever you tell me, whatever you say. She could have sat down and rationalized and come up with 1,000 different excuses, but she chose not to. The Imam said to her, may Allah bless you, Ya Khalid. He then looked at Abu Basir, the narrator of the hadith. He told him, Ya Aba Basir, أَتَسْمَعُ مَا تَقُولُ هَذِهِ الْمَرْأَةِ? Are you hearing what this woman is saying? Are you seeing what an incredible gem we're dealing with here? Then the Imam told her, yes, Ya Khalid, if you so much as take one sip or one bite of this, it will come back to haunt you when your soul reaches this portion. Meaning when you're about to die, when your soul's being extracted, that's when the angel of death will make sure that you pay for this sin. You did the right thing, may Allah bless you. Then the Imam gave a juristic rule that scholars use to this very day. This hadith, by the way, is narrated in the blessed book of Al-Kafi by Shaykh Al-Kulayni radwanullah ta'ala alayh. And scholars have referred to this hadith specifically in order to prove it's considered a nas, meaning that it's proof beyond any question that alcohol contaminates and pollutes anything it comes in contact with. Because the Imam said that if you can insert a needle in alcohol, the droplets of alcohol that remain on this needle, if they fall into a barrel of water, they make it najis. An entire barrel, if a drop of alcohol falls into it, it becomes najis. So scholars have used this hadith and this statement to make this case. The point being, brothers and sisters, قَلَّدْتُكَ دِينِي, as Khalid said. We take our religion from the imams of the ahlulbayt and no one else. If there is so much as a weak hadith, so-called weak hadith, meaning it has a chain of transmission that isn't 100%, doesn't give you 100% certainty, right? Even a weak hadith that is opposed on the other side by what? By my own views and opinions. I take my views and my opinions and throw them into the garbage bin and prefer the hadith over anything else. That's how it should be. That's what submission means. That's what surrender means. But people try to rationalize. Oh, hijab isn't for this day and age. I mean, come on. Maybe one day in some distant epoch, 1,000 years ago, hijab made sense. I've actually heard this myself. People have done TED Talks about this. Back in those days, women felt that they were at risk of harassment and they were in danger. If they went out of their home, there'd be thugs and there'd be criminals and there'd be, dirt bags out there who might bring harm to them. So hijab made sense. They had to cover up so their beauty, their adornment wouldn't be visible, so that people wouldn't bring any harm to them. But nowadays, come on. Women are educated. Women are doctors, engineers, politicians, physicians, and so on and so forth. You can't really reconcile this with that. It's a different age, it's a different era. We need to revisit these rules. Revisit the Quran. As though the Quran has become defunct or turned into some kind of an archaic text which no longer applies because it's old. Just like saying the sun is old, so we don't need the sun anymore. We need to come up with something else to replace the sun, some kind of an alternative. Just because it's old doesn't mean that it's run out of value or become useless. Which is why one of the foundational principles in our religion and in the jurisprudence of the school of the ahlulbayt and even other schools of thought is halalu Muhammadin halalun ila yawm al-qiyamah. وحرام محمد حرام إلى يوم القيامة. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Recite another loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. But how does this make sense? It doesn't have to make sense. Who told you that everything, every rule, every juristic verdict has to make sense to you? Who told you that? I honestly don't know where this notion of Islam being a perfectly rational religion, rational in the sense that we should all have a rational justification for every single thing that Islam came up with. Where did this come from? Who came up with that? I have no idea. It certainly is not in line with the verses of the Quran and the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt. There are so many things that we can't rationalize, we don't understand. Take this example again of Prophet Adam ala nabiyina wa alihi wa alayhi afdalu salati wa salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He told the angels that I'm going to create, inni ja'alun fil ardi khalifa, I am appointing on earth a representative, a successor, an heir, an ambassador, someone to represent me. The angels turned around and said, أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاء. Are you gonna create? And of course the angels, they're speaking to God, they're addressing the creator of the universe. So, we have to contextualize this. Their question wasn't an objection, but rather to seek clarification. Oh Allah, are you going to create this human race that's going to spread mischief and corruption and shed innocent blood? Why? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, quiet, silent, shut your mouths. I know what you do not know. إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Not me and you. Forget us. These insignificant little creatures that we call human beings, forget them. Jibreel, Allah told him, you don't understand what you're talking about. Mikael, Allah is telling him to be quiet. There are things you don't understand. There are things beyond your intellectual capacity. And yet you have pathetic human beings now challenging the wisdom of the Quran and the traditions of the ahlulbayt because it doesn't make sense to them. Because everything has to somehow fit within their own logical frameworks. Who do we think we are? If Jibreel couldn't fathom the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or comprehend His will and decision-making process, so to speak, who am I? Who are you? Quran centricity. Take these games somewhere else. You want to manipulate the meaning of the Quran and make it fit your own mold? And so the easiest thing to do is to say, Hasbuna kitabullah. Oh, hadiths. Come on, man. We all know hadiths aren't authentic. Who says? Who says? Who says has become an actual intellectual argument. Can you believe it? Who says? Scholars of this religion, giants of this faith, devoted their entire lives to the preservation, interpretation, elucidation of these ahadith, of the traditions of the Holy Prophet and his household. Who says? You're a child. Go learn your ABCs before you open your mouth and talk about these things. Hijab. Which is why suddenly these things have lost their value in our community, haven't they? People complain to me all the time, how do I get my daughter to wear hijab? Well, maybe, just maybe, and I'm sorry if I'm stepping over my boundaries here, but if hijab was as important to you as school, you wouldn't have a problem with your daughter wearing hijab. Because when it comes to school, as important as going to school and getting an education is, there's no question there. But when it comes to school, can your boy or girl get up one day and say, you know what, Dad, you know what, Mom, I don't feel like going to school today. And the next day, and the next day. In fact, I want to take this whole week off. Can they do that? Or will you force them to go to school no matter what? You won't beat them, obviously, you shouldn't. You have no right to do so. You won't physically hurt them, which of course you shouldn't. But you will find a way to make sure they go to school. Then why is it that when it comes to hijab, when it comes to salat, when it comes to all of these other things, it's their choice. I don't want to force them. I want to let them go through that journey on their own. Isn't it pathetic? In other words, if you have these problems in your families, and I'm addressing the parents, 99% of the time when children are insubordinate, when children refuse to abide by the laws of our faith, I blame the parents, not the children. It's not their fault. God gave you a blank slate. Allah gave you an empty disc, and He said, fill it. Fill it with whatever you want. If you fill it with good things, they'll turn out to be beautiful souls, just like the people I'm seeing here tonight, and those of you watching this at home. But if you fill it with trash, then they're going to turn out to be trash members of society. Amir al-Mu'mineen says to his son, Imam al-Hasan, this is the Nahj al-Balagha, he says to him, oh my son, you know what I find interesting, by the way, before I mention the actual hadith, is the fact that the Imam is telling his son how and why he is using the strategy to discipline his own son. The respect a father gives to his son, to involve him in the process. The Imam says to him, Ya bunay, ala inna qalb al-hadath kal-ard al-khaliya. The heart of a young boy or girl is like an open field, one that's not harvested, one that has no plantation in it. So whatever we plant in it, we will sow. If you plant avocados and mangoes and date palms and so on and so forth, that's what you'll get. But if you plant weed, that's what you'll get. If you plant poppy seed, that's what you'll get. And if you leave it to its own, it'll be filled with junk. It'll become a junkyard. Everyone's going to come along and say, oh, that's an empty land, let's just throw our garbage there. Or it'll be filled with all kinds of parasites and weeds. So the Imam says to Imam al-Hasan that I have to hurry up and plant good seeds. If hijab truly matters to you, and I'm speaking to fathers and mothers, then your children will definitely grow up wearing hijab. The problem is, to most of us, getting a proper education is much more important than religion. Going to university is much more important than religion. Getting a good career is much more important than religion. Getting a good income is much more important than religion. See, that's the problem. It's a clash of values is what it is. It's not that your kids are bad or inherently evil. You can raise your children to be Muslims or Christians or Jews or atheists or whatever you want. It's in your hand. In another hadith, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, Sari'u, hurry to teaching your children good values, imparting the values of our beautiful religion to them before لِأَلَّا تَسْبِقَ إِلَيْهِمُ الْمُرْجِئَةِ, before deviant schools get to them. Because if you and I are dozing off and asleep, مَنْ نَامَ لَمْ يُنَمْ عَنْهُ, the commander of the faithful says so beautifully. He says, if you're dozing off, if you're asleep and don't know what's going on, the enemy is wide awake. The enemy is fully alert, plotting, scheming, working round the clock, making sure that they get to your children, so they can kidnap your children's minds using every tool available to them, from computer games to books of philosophy, whatever it is. From billboards on the street to what they find in their textbooks. If you, listen to this, if as a parent to whom getting a good education was important, right? If I saw my son one day with another kid and I realized that they're friends, but the other kid wasn't interested in studying. I knew this kid was into just goofing off and playing and not really studying or anything like that, would I not tell my son to not go out with this kid anymore? Then why is it that when it comes to religious values, we don't do this? Why is it that we don't probe into the values and practices of our children's friends to make sure that if one of them doesn't pray, I would tell my son not to hang around with him, not to go out with him? Why? Because come on, let's be honest with ourselves. Religion doesn't really occupy any significant priority in our lives, because religion can take a back seat. Right now what's important is this, that, and the other, is for them to graduate, to become lawyers and doctors and whatnot, so that I can then take a picture of their certificate and post it on WhatsApp, so every auntie and every uncle all over the world can send their happy emojis and their clappy, smiley faces. That's what it's all about. It's not so much about these values. But how beautiful is it though, when you have parents who raise their children, raise their boys to resemble Ali al-Akbar, al-Qasim, Abdullah ibn al-Hasan, Amr ibn Janada, and so on and so forth. And raise their girls to resemble Sukaina, Ruqayya, Zainab. The Zainabi culture. How beautiful is it, especially in this difficult time of ours, brothers and sisters, when so many of you are sitting at home, unable to attend physical majalis, in-person gatherings, that you actually try and make your children live out the experience of Karbala. Make them wear clothes, and make them act in a certain manner, and make them reenact the scenes from Ashura on these blessed nights, so that they could connect on a deep, intellectual, visceral, emotional level with the heroes of Karbala. Sukaina alayha salatu wassalam, when she encounters her father's body for the first time, she speaks to him, addresses him, and what does she complain of? She says, "Aba unzur ila ammati al-madhruba وَإِلَىٰ رُؤُوسِنَا الْمَكْشُوفَةِ." Father, look at my aunt who's being beaten, and the fact that our aba'ah is no longer over our heads. She complains of the lack of the hijab that they're used to. Allahu Akbar. Which is why Imam al-Hussain, when he arrived in Karbala, and we'll have to wrap up. When he arrived, he saw a sea of men, thousands upon thousands who were there to kill him. What did the Imam say? He said, "An-nas abidu dunya wad-dinu la'iqun ala alsinatihim." People are slaves of this dunya. As for religion, it is the saliva with which they moisturize their mouths. Religion is something that they need to be comfortable, to feel spiritual, to feel like members of the community. It's kind of a glue that they use to kind of create community. فَإِذَا مُحَّسُوا بِالْبَلَاءِ قَلَّ الدَّيَّانُونَ. They'll pray as long as their prayer doesn't contradict with their job. They'll fast as long as that doesn't inconvenience them in this life. They'll do all these things as long as there's no clash. If there was a clash, they would definitely put ahead their own interests. Their dunya is more important to them. Much more important. فَإِذَا مُحِّصُوا بِالْبَلَاءِ قَلَّ الدَّيَّانُونَ. Which is why the Quran tells us that the true believers, هُمْ أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. They prioritize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does Imam al-Hussain not love his son Ali al-Akbar? Of course he does. But Imam al-Hussain loves God's religion even more. And so if it came down to it, if these two clashed, Imam al-Hussain sacrifices his son, Aliyun al-Akbar, for his religion, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what sacrifice means. That's what being a Hussaini means. That's why being a Zainabi means. That you put ahead your religion, ahead of all of your interests, all of your desires, all of the community, whatever other people say, whatever the society says, whatever the media says. You think al-Baneen didn't love her 4 children? Sallallahu alayki ya al-Baneen. These 4 boys, including the crown jewel Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. What an incredible woman she was. When she first came to the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen, she said her name was Fatima. Her last name was Al-Kilabiyya. She said, don't call me Fatima, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ya Abu al-Hasan. May I request that you don't refer to me with my first name? Why? Because I don't want to feel that I'm replacing the mother of Imam al-Hasan, Imam al-Hussein, Zainab, Kulthum. So just call me by my kunya. Call me al-Baneen, the mother of the children. Why? Why the mother of the children of all the kunya that she could have chosen? It's because of the dream that she had seen. I don't want to go there. She knew that Allah would give her 4 beautiful boys, and that these boys had a mission to carry out. These boys had an incredible objective to reach. It is said that when Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas was born, Amir al-Mu'mineen took his newborn son, and he couldn't get enough of kissing those 2 tiny, tender hands. Because of course they knew that the historical trajectory which was launched on the accursed day of Saqifa would end in Karbala, and they knew all of the details that would come along, that would eventually take place. He would kiss those tiny hands non-stop. al-Baneen loved her children, but she loved Hussein even more. Which is why they say, when the caravan returned to Medina, remember many of the women, many of the widows whose husbands had died in Karbala, their families came to Kufa, and they took them back to their tribes, which means that Zainab and the family of Abu Abdullah had to continue the journey on their own. Aywa wa ilahwa musibata. And so when they went back to Medina, it was a very small caravan. It was only the women of Bani Hashim. Zainab came back. Bishr ibn Hadlam famously called out, Ya Ahla Yathrib, La muqama lakum biha. O people of Yathrib. Yathrib was the previous Islamic name for Medina. It means disease. When Rasulullah came to Medina, the name was changed to Tayyibah, which means healing. And yet Bishr ibn Hadlam is now reminding the inhabitants of this city that this city has been restored to what it was prior to Islam. Because Hussein left this Medina with his family and his children, and now the women are back, some of the children are back, but Hussein is no longer with them. When they returned, Lady Zainab had had enough of this trip, the pain, the tribulation. So when they went home, Zainab said not to allow anyone to come and visit them. We want to grieve in peace. We want to cry on our own. Which is why when someone came knocking on the door, she sent one of the maids to go and say, please give us some peace. Allow us to grieve by ourselves. The maid went to the door and said what her mistress Zainab had told her. So the stranger on the other side of the door said, Ana sharikatu Zainab fil aza. I am not a stranger. I am a partner with Zainab in this grief. And what a true partner she was. When Zainab heard those words, she says, أظن أنها أم البنين. Let her come in. Umm al-Banin came inside the house. I can't imagine the meeting that happened. Zainab has so many stories to tell al-Banin. al-Banin has so many questions. Ya Zainab, you left. Imam al-Hussain was with you. Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas was guarding you. There were so many men with you. What happened to them? Why would you come back all alone? They say that when al-Banin saw Zainab, she called out, Wa waladah wa Hussaina. My son Hussein, where is he? She didn't mention Abbas. It was Zainab who said in response, Wa akha wa Abbas. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم لا تدعوني ويك أم البنين تذكروني بليوث العرين يا ليت شعري أكما أخبر بأن عباس قطيع اليمين